مرحبا بكم مشاهدينا في حوارات السياق. ما زالت الأزمة الأوكرانية تمثل قلقا كبيرا في رأس المجتمع الدولي، خاصة بعد محادثات وصفت بأنها بالغة الصعوبة بين الولايات المتحدة وروسيا تناولت أمن أوروبا والأزمة الأوكرانية بجنيف. عموما للمزيد من المتابعة حول هذا الملف ينضم إلينا السفير ريتشارد كوزلاريش، نائب مساعد وزير الخارجية السابق للشؤون الأوروبية ومسؤول شؤون أوروبا بمكتب الاستخبارات الوطنية الأمريكي. سيد ريتشارد، مرحبا بك معنا.
Thank you very much for inviting. It's very important to discuss these issues today.
هل فشلت المحادثات بين روسيا والغرب؟
Well, I prefer to start with the assumption that they're not going to fail. I think let's just look at the positive side. We've had, almost 8 hours of discussions between the U.S. and Russia bilaterally in Geneva. There was agreement to continue those discussions. That's good news. We had the discussions then yesterday in Brussels with NATO and Russia. And today we have with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in Vienna, another round of discussion. So what I think we should try to focus on is how can we make the diplomacy continue to address the key issues that are surrounding this crisis, which Russia created. I think the U.S. side has been very clear. Obviously, I don't know all the details of what was going on, behind the closed doors in Geneva, but I think the United States was very clear about the consequences if Russia did not back down from this 100,000 troop presence in and around Ukraine and take a step toward diplomatically dealing with the issues which are still out there, both regarding Ukraine specifically, but regarding U.S. and Russian relations. So if the talks fail, then I think there are going to be a series of very, very visible and direct consequences. What Russia will do will determine what those consequences are.
هل روسيا جادة في مسألة الدبلوماسية؟ تحديدا أسأل هذا السؤال بسبب رفعها لسقف المطالب.
Yeah, are they serious about diplomacy? If I had to make a judgment based on what I know now, I think that question cannot be answered as long as there are 100,000 Russian troops poised to start military action against Ukraine. And Russia has not either reduced the number or disavowed the possibility of military action against Ukraine. I think it's up to Russia to prove that it's serious about diplomacy. I think the U.S., our NATO allies, and our partners in the OSCE are making clear that we are committed. We take Russia seriously. Russia's a serious country, and we would prefer to engage with them diplomatically and try to address the common problems that we face around the world that cooperation with Russia will be essential to deal with, such as climate change. There are a whole range of opportunities for cooperation, but that will not work if Russia has decided not to pursue a diplomatic step now. And that, as I said, that would require them to make visible, serious withdrawals of their military presence and disavow the use of military force to resolve their differences with Ukraine.
هناك من يقول إن سيناريو الحرب الباردة يعود إلى الأذهان مع الاختلافات طبعا. هل هذه مبالغة؟
That is really the really key question. Another way of asking that, I think, is did the Cold War ever end from the point of view of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin? And there are those who say, and I tend to agree with them, that it has not. That this is a continuation of the Cold War. As much as most of us would like to put that behind us, it would appear that that Russia wants, whether it's a new Cold War or a continuation of the old one, to continue to have this confrontation that they've manufactured with the United States and with our NATO allies. Two things that I think we need to keep in mind is that Putin has made clear again and again that he believes the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, I think one could see what's going on, not just with Ukraine, but Belarus and the South Caucasus, more recently in Kazakhstan, as examples of Russian behavior trying to, if not recreate the Soviet Union, certainly recreate the influence that Moscow has on these now independent states that are on their borders. Yeah, I think that's a kind of discussion that needs to take place, about what is the overall environment. Are we going to retreat to what was not a good period, or are we going to build a new period of cooperation, which I think is what we would like to see happen today. But whether it's a new Cold War or the old Cold War, I think that's really a very, very key question.
في مفاوضات الأمس حصلت موسكو على تطمينات بشأن توسع الناتو. هل تعتقد أن هذا يقلل من تعقيد الوضع؟
I don't believe so. I was at the State Department during the period of expansion of NATO to countries, from the former Warsaw Pact, and there was no intent on the part of the United States to deny any country in Europe that met the criteria for joining NATO to join NATO, and that door has been open, since the period of the collapse of the Soviet Union. That door will not close. I think that message came clear, both in the bilateral talks and in the talks in NATO. And I just I don't see any way there's a way of formulating this issue that would satisfy the Russians and still maintain the position of the United States and NATO allies that the door is open. If other countries want to join NATO, as they have over the last few decades, they can, but that's their decision, not some decision between the US and Russia or a Russia-imposed requirement, if you will, for improved relations.
صحيفة بوليتيكو الأمريكية كشفت عن موافقة بايدن على نقل شحنة أسلحة إلى أوكرانيا لمواجهة روسيا. كيف تقرأ ذلك تحديداً في هذا التوقيت؟
Well, we've had this ongoing relationship with Ukraine ever since Russia invaded Crimea, seized Crimea, seized the Donbass. We're trying to help Ukraine maintain its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and its independence. And we are using U.S. assistance in all its forms to help do that. So, training, equipping the Ukrainians to defend themselves is perfectly understandable, I think, from both the point of view of Ukraine, but also from the point of view of US and our allies who are helping us in this.
العقوبات حتى الآن تبدو وكأنها الخيار الأمريكي الوحيد المتوفر للتعامل مع أي تصعيد روسي. هل تتفق مع هذا الطرح؟
Well, sanctions are a tool that is always available. Let me put it that way. And it certainly is not something that we would care to use as I think as much as we have used it in the case of Russia, but Russia has given us no choice. Sanctions are meant to create an environment where Russia has to withdraw from its confrontational position vis-a-vis Ukraine and the US. And so the administration is, I suspect that that's one of the things that was discussed in Geneva was the extent sanctions that the U.S. could apply beyond those that already exist. I will note, I haven't followed the details, but I will note that in the U.S. Congress, there are efforts underway to strengthen U.S. sanctions against Russia because of the confrontation with Ukraine. So this is more than a position of the Biden administration. There is support in the Congress for doing more. There is support among European countries for the sanctions regime that's in place, and probably for making additional sanctions apply if the situation requires it. But the U.S. is in constant consultation with our NATO allies, with the EU on next steps. But sanctions are at the core of the U.S. response to the current situation.
هذا يدفعني سيد ريتشارد إلى السؤال عن فعالية العقوبات بالنسبة لبلد مثل روسيا. تحتاج أوروبا إلى غازه الطبيعي.
That too is a very important question. And, in the United States, there has been a decades-long debate about the usefulness, the effect of economic sanctions. Do they result in changed behavior of the country, in this case Russia, when these are applied? And I think that's a fair question. But there's another dimension to sanctions, which are to deny economic activities, financing, access to technology for companies and in some cases individuals, in the country that's being targeted with the sanctions. In the case of Russia, I would argue that they have had an impact on the ability of the Russian economy, particularly to acquire necessary technology to develop their energy resources further. Have they changed behavior yet? I think that's a question that both commentators and people in government will discuss. But what strikes me about sanctions now is that we have been very successful in cooperating with our European allies in applying collective sanctions that address, the Russian challenge that it's created regarding Ukraine. Quite honestly, I was surprised that this unity has been sustained, because the U.S., as you point out, has interests that are different than European, particularly in the energy area, where access to natural gas for a number of European countries from Russia is important. But notwithstanding that, there has been this unity, even including on the energy side. And this is an area where I think the U.S. can help Europe by encouraging U.S. LNG exports to Europe, so that there can be alternatives to the Russian natural gas, and to address the problems that still exist with Nord Stream 2, the pipeline that goes under the Baltic, which is simply a political project designed to avoid gas going through Ukraine. So I think, beyond the sanctions that we think about, and you raised the Iranian sanctions regime, which when I was ambassador in Azerbaijan, I saw firsthand, and I actually thought it was quite effective, but that's another story. But when you get beyond sanctions themselves, there are steps, particularly in the energy area and energy cooperation, that the United States can take that positively enhance Europe's ability to resist Russian pressure.
شكرا جزيلا لك السفير ريتشارد كوزلاريش نائب مساعد وزير الخارجية السابق للشؤون الأوروبية ومسؤول شؤون أوروبا بمكتب الاستخبارات الوطني الأمريكي للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the questions.
مشاهدينا شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.